Greetings. Thanks for stopping by. Health and happiness to you. I'm Skol, and this week at Skol EDC, we've been doing the Celebrate America series featuring an American-made knife every day leading up to the 4th of July. And here today is the 4th of July, so happy birthday to America. And what are we celebrating? The signing of the Declaration of Independence, and recognized as America's birthday, July 4th, 1776. So 250 years ago today. Happy Independence Day. And we've been doing, just like fireworks, fireworks have kind of a build up to the grand finale. This is the grand finale video. So all week we did one knife per day. But here at the end you'll see several new American-made companies and Barlows. So we're going to talk about Barlows, and we're going to talk about George Washington's knife, and there's a great patriotic folklore story that goes along with George Washington's knife, so I'm going to tell that to you real quick. So pause the video, get a nice beverage, and I'm going to tell you a nice story, nice patriotic story for 4th of July. So first, what is this white background? It's George Washington's first flag, and my flag was too big, so I kind of folded it up to be the tabletop here, but here's what the whole thing looks like. An appeal to heaven with a pine tree. So what's that all about? So one of the early rebellions was called the Pine Tree Rebellion, and the British had been highly regulating the timber industry in America. And so there was a rebellion, and the pine tree became a symbol of revolution at the early stages of the revolution. And even at Bunker Hill, one of the earliest battles, they would have been flying a flag that had a pine tree on it. And as a legacy of the pine tree symbol, Maine's, up in New England, Maine, the state of Maine, and Vermont both, their first state flags had a pine tree, and that goes back to the legacy of the pine tree being a symbol of the revolution. And then when George Washington made his first flag, he put a pine tree on it, and he also put the phrase "an appeal to heaven." That comes from John Locke's second treatise on government. So reading different ideas about government, and the idea was when you're getting injustice from the monarch, you have the right to appeal to the higher authority, appeal to heaven for justice. So that's the idea behind that phrase, and that's what this flag means. So all the Continental soldiers in 1775, 1776, they would have seen this early George Washington flag, and George Washington, as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, he ordered this flag to be flown on all the U.S. Navy ships. So even on all the American ships, they would have all seen the same flag. And at Valley Forge, all those Continental soldiers, they would have seen this flag. So we'll use that as the background for our story. And here's some other examples of Revolutionary War flags. So we didn't have our identity settled yet, but here's another flag. The Gadsden flag was a timber rattler, snake in the grass. It says, "Don't tread on me," so that's one of the famous rallying phrases. The British monarchy was stepping and treading on us, not treating us fairly. So now we're in a revolution. And then Betsy Ross came up with the ultimate winner later on, with the 13 stars representing the 13 colonies and 13 stripes. So that became our first national flag. But here's some earlier symbols, earlier flags of the revolution and George Washington's first flag. And then there's a great story about how George Washington's knife saved the revolution. So let me tell you that story. It starts a lot earlier when he was a teenager. He was interested in joining the Navy, and he was working on getting away to become an officer in the Navy, in the British Navy. So when he was younger, before the Revolution, he was a British citizen in the colonies, and he wanted to join the Navy. He had aspirations, and he was from a fairly well-to-do family. And his mother, Mary Ball Washington, they had a mansion and an estate So they were pretty well off, and he was a higher status person who could get into the officer corps. And he had to weigh in with a letter of introduction. But his mother had been corresponding with her brother, who lives in England. The brother's name was John Ball, and her name's Mary Ball Washington. And John Ball described the Navy, the British Navy, to her and said it was a floating H word, H-E-L-L. The British Navy's a floating hell. And if you can imagine, back then it actually was, because it was always dangerous to cross the ocean with only wind and sails. And a lot of people didn't want to do that. You'd have bad food, you'd be trapped on the boat, you'd be trapped with people that were trouble. So they could never get enough sailors. The king needed a navy, and he needed sailors for his navy, and didn't have enough volunteers. So people would be pressed into service. So you had people that were there against their will, and you had troublemakers too. Criminals, sometimes they could serve their sentence by serving in the British Navy to serve out their sentence. So you're trapped with maybe unsavory people and people that didn't want to be there in the first place, and old food. So scurvy became a new problem, because now you have long voyages without access to fresh fruit. You're literally out in the middle of the ocean for sometimes months, and you could get scurvy if you don't have fresh fruit. So that became a thing. So all that, the mother didn't want that for George. She didn't like the path he was on. She wanted to talk him out of it, and she did her best, and she was able to convince him to not go into the British Navy. She wanted him to continue his studies to become a surveyor. There was a lot of surveying yet to be done. That was a good profession that there would be lots of work for. So he was learning surveying, and as the years went on, there's a movie out now called Young Washington, which talks about that time frame of George Washington. So he didn't go in the Navy, but he did, when the French and Indian War broke out, become an officer in the British Army. So that gave him some early military experience. But the story of the knife begins when he agreed to listen to his mother. She, as a reward, ordered from the mercantile. You'd go to the mercantile and place an order, and then if they didn't have it there, they could order it from England, and there was the trade back and forth, so it would have been a while. But her order to England for a fine gentleman's pocket knife, and this is what she got back with her order. It was made of mother of pearl, which is made out of seashells, nacre, the same material that pearls are made out of from sea mollusks. So that's an exotic material, so it was a pretty nice knife, and she gave it to Washington as a reward, George Washington, when he was a teenager. Here's an actual picture of the original knife, which is on display at the Freemason Lodge, called the George Washington Lodge in Alexandria, Virginia. After George Washington died, the actual knife was bequeathed in the will to the lodge, and they've had it on display for hundreds of years now. And I've got a replica here. I actually have another replica I'll show you. But what I wanted to look up something else. Here's what I wanted. Always obey your superiors. That's what the mother said. So he got the knife as a reward, and for always obeying your superiors. So he always remembered that as a gift from his mother, and with that phrase, what it was for. So that was tied together. And years later, so now he goes through the French and Indian War. Now we're in the Revolution, and we're not doing well. So we've lost some really big battles. George Washington is in charge. They lost the devastating loss at being driven out of New York. We gave it our best shot. George Washington really wanted to win that battle. It was hard to talk him out of, he almost wanted to have a go down with the ship type attitude, and he was almost captured. And finally, his officer fellows were able to get him to leave the battlefield they had lost, and it was pretty devastating. And George Washington kind of felt like that was their best shot, and they weren't able to do it. The British drove them out of New York City. And then now, fast forward, now we're at Valley Forge, and we're settling down for the winter. The roads aren't good anymore for any armies to be traveling, so everybody's going to settle down for the winter. And where American Army is at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. And what happens is George Washington starts thinking, we've lost all the battles. We gave it our best shot. If we go fight another battle, we have less men, we have less weapons, we have less supplies, we have less navy, and it's not really getting better. So if we just go fight another battle, it's just these men are going to die, and I'm not really making it any better. We gave it our best shot. He starts thinking about resigning, and he actually writes a resignation letter with a quill. He has decided to resign at Valley Forge, and he calls all his officers in to announce his resignation. He already has it written up in the envelope, and he's announcing he's going to resign. But his friend, Henry Knox, reminded him of something that became a significant moment in the Revolution. So if you can imagine officers sitting down around dinner, sometimes they'd have dinner together or at their staff meetings. You can talk about Army stuff, issues, and float some ideas with your fellow officers of how to handle different situations and how to solve problems. Or just small talk, you might show off your pocket knife. So that's something George Washington had done. He had this exotic mother of pearl material. He showed it off to his fellow officers. So Henry Knox had seen it and heard about the story of the mother, and it was for obeying your superiors. So Henry Knox, I'm going to read this to you so you can hear what he said. And Henry Knox was also a member of the Freemason Lodge and a friend of George Washington. And he had heard the story about the knife, and here's what he said at the meeting where George Washington was announcing that he was going to resign. Among the officers present and sitting in the council was Knox, who reminded him of the knife and his mother's injunction, always obey your superiors. You are commanded to lead this army, and no one has ordered you to cease leading it, Knox said. And that meant something to Washington. So Washington paused and said, there's something to that. I will think it over. And they say 30 minutes later, after thinking it over, he came out and he tore up his resignation letter. So that's a pivotal moment in the Revolution. And if you think about all the brain cells, he was thinking about a resignation letter. It would have all your standard resignation. You can almost outline it yourself. Continental Congress, thank you for the opportunity. It was an honor. I did my best. We did our best at New York City. I don't see how we could. I don't see a way forward. Maybe someone else can do better. Maybe pepper in a few excuses. We don't have this and that. But anyway, I resign, and maybe someone else can still do better or something like that. A typical resignation letter, all the time and brain cells he was spending on that. After tearing up the resignation letter, it's a whole new mindset. So now you've freed up your brain, you've cleared your mind. Now you can think about the important things. And we can even step through some of the same questions and thoughts that George Washington would have had in his brain now that he's thinking about winning instead of thinking about resigning. So how do we win? What do we need? We need more men. We need more arms. How do we get more men and arms? Well, if this were a game, it's like we're first quarter's over and we're down 3-0. What we need is to get a point on the board. If we get a point on the board, now we're back in the game. That'll help us recruit more men. If we can show we can do something, we need a victory to raise morale and to recruit more troops. We also need more arms. So now finding a way, what is the solution? What can we do? So nearby was Trenton, New Jersey, and the British had a garrison there of Hessian mercenaries. Hessians were a region in Germany, so that British monarchy had hired some Hessians to come over and help them out with the war. And they were thinking, how could we take Trenton, and if we can do that and get all the muskets there, we'd have more arms. And if we could get a win, we could get more men. That would help us to win. So now they're thinking about a way to win. Well, how do you win at Trenton? And then you start thinking through the details. What's the next question? What's the best way to do that? So they're going to take 2,600 soldiers over to Trenton. What's the best way to win? Probably with surprise. And when can you surprise? Maybe on Christmas Day. So that was the plan formulating. So on Christmas Day, you can imagine the British pulling in their scouts so the scouts could have Christmas dinner as well, along with everybody else. They might drink more, they might feast more, might be less scouts out, so that's the day to move the army. So that's what happened on Christmas Day. While there was less scouts out, we had the crossing of the Delaware. So here's a famous painting depicting it. George Washington crossing the Delaware River on Christmas Day, and we went undetected all the way to Trenton. We took them by surprise. We captured the garrison. We got all the armory stocked there, so now we had more arms. We captured a bunch of Hessians. We got a point on the board, so now it's 3-1. We're back in the game. That all wouldn't have happened if he would have resigned. So here's some replicas. So that was a critical moment in America's history that came down to a pocket knife. That was a gift from his mother that turned things around. So here's one replica. This one is actually from the gift shop. So you can see there's a picture of George Washington and a replica. So they've got the original on display, and they commissioned to have some replicas made to sell in their gift shop. And you can go online, find the George Washington Lodge in Alexandria, and you can buy this very knife, which is a good replica of George Washington's penknife. And here's another one. And this one has a sleeve around it, Camillus. And you can see it's very similar. So in the 1990s, and it's also has a picture with the same wording, so that it seems like the box is kind of a replica of the other box. So I know they said this was commissioned by Frost Cutlery, and this one came first. This was the Camillus in the 1990s. There was also an older version called the 1932 George Washington knife. That one didn't follow it doesn't really look like a replica as much as these do. These are a lot closer. So here's mother of pearl, 3 rivets and a pin. And this one actually is made in America, which is neat. And you can see there's a metal bolster, and there's a back spring. It's a slip joint, very small knife. So that's a gentleman's pen knife. He probably only used it for quills, sharpening his quills. And then there's some verbiage, the George Washington penknife. This is the Camillus one. I'll get it close. You can pause and read if you like. explanation that came with the knife. Congratulations. Lifetime warranty and limits. Made in the USA. So that's a pretty nice one. I got this off of eBay. So this came out in the 90s as a replica, but I got it from, it said it was an estate sale. So you can imagine some person was excited to get the replica, and then after passing on, his family put it up for an estate sale. I think he'd like it that I got his knife because I'm someone who appreciates it. I think when I pass on, my kids are both into knives, so these, maybe it looks like I got one for each of them. They'll inherit my whole knife collection. Now this one is from the gift shop, and they've got some verbiage too. One thing I think it's funny, it says, congratulations, and then it said, you've just purchased an exact replica, but I think they're exaggerating about saying it's an exact replica. And here's the verbiage of that one. You can read that by pausing and scrolling if you like, and here's the whole story, the George Washington penknife, but you can also read it online. A lot of the details I just told you, and there's reason to believe that this folklore is true because the knife was passed directly from George Washington's nephew to the lodge, the executor of George Washington's will. So, and it says he was in his possession for 56 years. So that's all probably true. Also, the Mason story, George Washington probably could have disputed if that didn't happen. The story was going around, so I think it's true. There's reasons to believe it's true. But I did want to mention one other thing. There's also folklore that George Washington carried a Barlow. But would you call this a Barlow? So I know in England they use the word, the description Barlow, a little more loosely, and it can just mean one metal bolster. But in America, we kind of say the bolster's got to be 1/3 handle length. We're a little bit more strict about that. So when the folklore that George Washington carried a Barlow, are they talking about this and just loosely calling it a Barlow? Because most people would call this a penknife. Or did George Washington also carry a Barlow? And I had an idea about that. So look how he had it for so long, but very little wear on the blade. If you could imagine using something for 50 years, he would have kind of used up all the blade with resharpening. So I think this was a light use, probably carried with his quill set and his ink and parchment papers. So a little bottle of ink. When he was going over the Delaware, do you think he was carrying a bottle of ink in his pocket? No. Or his quills? I don't think he would be carrying this type of knife in his pocket either at that time. Also, he wouldn't be standing in the boat. So that's just for dramatic effect. Everyone knows you'd be sitting in the boat. But for the painting, it looks more leadershiply to be standing. And it was an icy river sneak attack. A great moment that saved the revolution. But what we're trying to answer is, did George Washington carry an actual Barlow and not just this knife? And I'm leaning towards yes. And my evidence is this couldn't be his only knife. With all the things he did and how often knives were used back then, I think this was a special handle, a special gift that he kept nice and probably kept with his quill set. So it was able to last for 50 years. And the most popular, America's first favorite pocket knife was the Barlow. So the pioneers would have had Barlows, pretty common. And a lot of the soldiers would have had a Barlow in their pocket. So how many of those soldiers going to attack Trenton from Valley Forge, crossing the Delaware, had Barlows in his pocket? Maybe even George Washington had an actual real Barlow in his pocket. So, you know, you have user knives that you carry in your pocket, and then you have special knives, collection knives, or light use knives. That sounds reasonable to me. I think he probably did have more of a user knife that he would carry on him. He had a sword and probably a pocket knife. Most of the other soldiers, you'd have a knife and your primary weapon. So anyway, I'm leaning towards probably as a user in his pocket, he probably did have a Barlow. Barlow was the most popular pattern at the time, so I think it's probably true that this was George Washington's knife, the one that's at the lodge. That really was his knife, and a gift from his mother. I think the story is true, and I also think he also had a Barlow, and that's more speculation, but most popular pattern in America's first favorite pocket knife was the Barlow. Now I'm going to show you some actual made in America Barlows. So here's a case knife. Case is a long time part of Americana. They have a long history. And here's a buffalo horn jig bone Barlow. And you've heard of Greateasterncutlery. Here's a Charlie Campagna special soup bone Barlow. They're a highly collectible brand. Here's another Greateasterncutlery. This one's a little smaller, but that's a Barlow too. That they call that a pocket watch Barlow. And then here's some more. Here's Cooper Cutlery. These are all made in America. So Case is located in Pennsylvania. And Greateasterncutlery is also located in Pennsylvania. Here's one made in Ohio, Cooper Cutlery. And Cooper Cutlery has acquired a lot of brand names like Shatton Morgan, and then this one's New York Knife Company, and then they made Barlow under that brand name. But do you know what that is? Do you recognize that? It's a mammoth bone. So I'll be doing a video specifically on that one soon, but that's a pretty rare material. That is a very nice Barlow to have. And then here's a Queen City Cutlery. That's another old famous brand name that was acquired by Smoky Mountain Knives Works, but they get theirs made in America. These were all made in America. So Queen City Cutlery. And it looks pretty similar to this one, Bear & Son. So who do you think the OEM for Smoky Mountain is? Probably Bear & Son. That's a pretty good guess since the blades are almost exactly, and sizes and shapes and everything. It looks just about exactly the same. Here's a smooth white bone. Bear & Son made in America. So there's a whole bunch of, I think I have another one. Here's another Bear & Son. Same size, but in walnut. So there's a bunch of American-made Barlows. So for my grand finale, I thought it'd be fun to show off a whole bunch of American companies. Case, Greateasterncutlery, and Cooper Cutlery. They own Shatton Morgan, and New York Knife Company, and some other brand names I've seen. Made in Winchester, Ohio, South Central Ohio. Queen City Cutlery, and Bear & Son. So I've been enjoying collecting Barlows. This is kind of the year of the Barlow for me. I really like the Barlow pattern, and all this year I've been thinking about doing this video and telling the story of George Washington's knife and how it saved the Revolution, and then showing off all these Barlows. But and then I also got the replica George Washington knives. So here's this one is from the gift shop, which you can go to their website and order, and I got it on sale. It was less than $50. They were doing a 250th America sale, and they had it marked down, and it was less than $50. And then I got this one off of eBay, and it was also less than $50. So something very similar to what George Washington had in his possession, but I think he also had a user Barlow. I choose to lean towards that as being plausible. So anyway, this was my grand finale video with a nice patriotic story. If you haven't heard that before, I'm sure you enjoyed it for 4th of July. You might even want to share that story with your relatives. So if you want to, you could just share the link to this video and they can watch the video for themselves. And happy 4th of July. You can go, if you didn't catch all the rest of the Celebrating America, I made a playlist, so you can go catch them all in the playlist called USA Made, and that's my Celebrating America series. And I'll add this new video to the playlist. And you can also go check out all the other videos I did this week of American made knives celebrating America. So thanks for stopping by. I hope you enjoyed the video. And I am Skol. And remember, always carry a knife. And happy 4th of July.